people in the waiting room 5 more seconds to settle in, and then we can begin. Okay, here we go. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration's consultation, focusing on values, culture, and spirituality. My name is Azmaira Alibai, and I am the Faith and Ecosystems Coordinator at the United Nations Environment Program, Faith for Earth Initiative, responsible for the mobilization and the engagement of faith actors to address nature and environment challenges. We'd love to know who you are and where you're from, and it'd be great to see that in the chat. So I'll give you another 15 seconds to put your name, where you're from in the chat. In the chat, please. I see questions in the, chat is disabled. Sorry for that. So while Andrew helps us out with enabling the chat, I think we're going to move on with this very interesting consultation. So if you'll allow me to set the scene and share with you a little bit about where we're coming from, we're so thankful to be hosted by the Center for Earth Ethics and for this series of consultations to be hosted by them. They are based in New York City. And what we hope to achieve in this series is to leverage on the opportunity that the UN Decade presents. And this is the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration that was launched last year on World Environment Day, running from 2022 to 2021 to 2030. And it's an opportunity to galvanize broad engagement in protecting, conserving, and restoring the natural world. And so at UNEP Faith for Earth, we are so pleased to support this effort and seek to delve into our relationship with nature and ecosystems, and to mobilize action, particularly from the lens of values, culture, and spirituality. And if you were present in our fireside chat and our previous consultations, you would know that there's a need to enhance our engagement, enhance scholarship, and partnerships to strengthen this values-based engagement for the SDGs in order to see us accelerate action in achieving the 17 Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. So this series began in April 2020, and we focused first on air, and that was air pollution at the St. James Parish in the US, followed by a consultation on rivers, focusing on the river Yamuna in India. And now we move to the African continent, and in particular, Mombasa, Kenya, which is the city that we have chosen to focus this consultation on. There are 2 more consultations coming up, and that is a consultation on species, focusing on the Philippines, and in September, and that will be in September, and then on food. If you want to take part in these series of consultations, please stay until the end of the webinar to learn more about how you can get in touch with the team and how you can engage. Because we are partnering with faith-based organizations, especially to fulfill these speaker roles, and share with us experiences on the ground from grassroots speakers, from civil society, from the legal profession, etc. And so to foster this very robust engagement that we hope to achieve. And the objectives for this consultation are simple. There are 3 of them. And the first one is to share that at Unite for Earth, we're exploring the significance of cities in religious traditions. And our cities are not only built around religious sites, but also very key ecosystems um, that have formed the center of life, of community, and of traditions, social traditions. Our cities are, and we see this in our sacred texts, in religious sites, and these include the Bible and the Quran that highlight our connection with cities. And here we see a passage from Jeremiah 29:7 that says, "Seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile and pray to the Lord on its behalf. For in its welfare you have welfare." And from the Quran, we see this, the Quran chapter 2, verse 58, we see this passage, "Enter the city and eat freely from wherever you please. Enter the gate with humility, saying, absolve us. We will forgive your sins and multiply the reward for good doers." And so the question I pose to you is, how can we uplift these sacred teachings to enrich our duty of care for nature and the environment? And this is where we turn to urban areas as an overlooked ecosystem that's, as we know them, to be noisy, polluted, and overcrowded. And the past decade has seen us transition from rural to urban areas for opportunity, whether it's school, work, and various other reasons to these urban areas. So as we speak of ecosystem restoration, we cannot ignore urban areas as critical ecosystems, especially when we're presented with figures like the number of people living in cities is estimated to rise from 56% in 2021 to 68 to 70% in 2050. And we will continue to see our cities overwhelmed, the infrastructure, the social services, and the other services that local governments provide to people, to communities. Noting that in our faiths, we venerate nature, the animals, the land. The faith holds nature, biodiversity very close to our religious and cultural heritage, our identity. And so the second question I pose to you then is, how does the lack of nature and green space in the places that we live and in the places that we work impact how we express our faith? And so we move on to the focus of this consultation today, which is Mombasa City in Kenya. And it's a coastal city on the southern in southeastern Kenya along the Indian Ocean. And a larger part of Mombasa County focuses on mangroves, which are the peri-urban forests spreading from, and I'm going to use the pointer here, from the Mutwapa Creek, which covers this space here, through Chuda, which is this space, and then we have Changamwe, Kilindini, and Mwache. And so this covers this strip here. We will hear about the experience from the Brain Youth Group and the impact of their program on local communities, how they have leveraged their experiences to build the capacity of local communities, schools, school children, the youth, and have also partnered with key stakeholders in the region to uplift their program on mangrove restoration. Now, we see these fantastic restoration efforts around this area here, focusing on mangroves, focusing on coral reefs, and this is where we invite stakeholders to share any actions for nature that are within the city. And so we're talking about the need for restoration efforts to focus on these spaces, the very gray built environments that are devoid of green spaces. And this is what is lacking. The second objective of this consultation is to see green spaces as having ecosystem services and bringing ecosystem services to the people and communities. And of course, here we know that ecosystems, that green spaces protect from high daytime temperatures, from poor air quality due to the density of buildings and the prevalence of motor traffic in the city. Now, Mombasa has seen a record high temperature of 45.9 degrees Celsius, and on the daily average is in the mid 35 degrees Celsius. And we know that the density of buildings and drainage in Mombasa shows us that once it rains, the whole city floods. And this puts the people and communities there at risk of waterborne diseases. And when it rains, there's no movement within the city. We know that the flooding causes a lot of traffic. And so green spaces, and if we were to encourage the use of green spaces and in the city space, we would see that it would aid in the facilitation of the nutrient cycle, mitigate the risk of flooding due to poor rainwater, poor drainage system that exposes the city dwellers to diseases like malaria, like cholera, etc. But and the last point is where our conversation is going to focus today, is that there is a need for green spaces to preserve our age-old spiritual and religious traditions, where deities are represented as trees and rivers and animals, or praise and worship to God is manifested through creation. Green spaces within cities can address these issues. And so we ask you to think within cities and to achieve the goals that we would like to see in the green spaces, who can we turn to? We asked ourselves how we can advance this conversation to move it from a dialogue into action and to cement the role of faith actors. And I'm going to share my screen once more. Andrew, if you can let me know if you see this. There we go. No. Apologies, let me try and figure this out. There. Andrew, can you see my screen?
Yep, sure can.
Okay, great. And so I'm asking the question now, who can we turn to see these very gray spaces within Mombasa, so that we see more public and green spaces? And here, the simple response is faith actors. And so we only looked at the representation of temples and where these are located in the city. And this is what we find. And then we moved on to the churches and church land. And this is what we see. And if we finally look at the mosques in Mombasa, that is what we see. And so in towards our consultation today, we invited at least 60 Christian, Hindu, Muslim organizations in Mombasa to this consultation, as these are the major religions practiced within the city. And we must also acknowledge that Mombasa is the indigenous territory of the Swahili and the Mijikenda peoples. And we'll hear from Ms. Simran Katawa about the historical transitions of Mombasa's green space through the lens of colonialism, class, and culture. And last but not least, we will and this is the third objective of the consultation today, is to foster collaboration. And what we hope to demonstrate is the strategic engagement of faith actors, their the role that they already take up in the community as frontline caretakers, as community anchors, peacemakers, and social catalyzers, in demonstrating their convincing and their convening power, as well as the institutions that they own. And so in demonstrating this, Dr. Chris Elisara will connect us with the global scene to show us where faith actors are already engaged in policy spaces with organizations like the United Nations Environment Programme, as well as UN Habitat and the UNFCCC. And with that, I am pleased to welcome Ms. Simran Katau, who is an environmental consultant, an urban sustainability and climate adaptation enthusiast, to share with us Mombasa's complex colonial history. And in doing so, she will demonstrate the availability of green spaces in Mombasa, who has access to them, and some of the challenges that we need to consider as we advance this conversation to action. Simran, over to you.
Hello, everyone. I hope my screen can be seen, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. So my name is Simran and I'm an environmental consultant, and I hope everyone is comfortable, ready to listen. And I work within the space of climate adaptation and climate mitigation, specifically on the African continent, but more so focused on East Africa. I have done my postgraduate in environmental geographical science, where I focused on green space. But personally, what I think is most important is that I'm from Mombasa. And I feel like that is what has motivated me. The research that I will be presenting to you is on the historical understanding of how green space has been shaped on the island. And I've looked at this through a racial, class, and cultural lens. The two main objectives that I think I'll tackle is obviously why green space is important. And I think Asmaira has touched on that quite in quite detail. So I'll add to that. So why green space is important for our urban areas and Mombasa in particular. And then how historical changes and transitions of green space in Mombasa have led to the current urban formation. So to fully understand, To fully understand the layers of Mombasa's green space, I think we need to first settle with what green space is. And it's an umbrella term for all areas of land that consist of predominantly unsealed, permeable, soft surfaces such as soil, grass, shrubs, and trees. And these are often public spaces that are publicly managed and are specifically intended for recreation and well-being use. So we understand that green space provides key environmental services for flora and fauna and can better regulate temperatures by cooling areas and can provide socio-psychological services by greatly improving the mental health of communities, but also increasing the perceptibility of livability of an area, right? And we've understood from Asmaira's introduction that there are many advantages to green spaces in urban settings. But for Mombasa in particular, there are three I want to touch upon. The first is its cooling effects. In the most extreme comparison, so if we look at tar, so a road that is black and has material that absorbs a lot of heat versus soft permeable soil, grass, bush, shrubs, we can see that green spaces are 7.5 degrees cooler than other concrete and urbanized areas. Now, considering that in the next 20 years, we will have, with the trends and with 2 degrees of warming, as predicted, in many climate mappings done, all over the world, that in 20 years, we'll see that 365 days will be too hot to work in. Mombasa is already known for its humid, hot weather, but with current trends, it will get hotter. And we need to recognize that the way Mombasa is built is not conducive to these higher temperatures. Furthermore, and the second way that green space is very important is flooding risk alleviation. By having exposed soil surfaces like soil, average flow velocities of large quantities of water that can occur in flash flooding, which Mombasa is not adverse to, can reduce by 50% and can also delay the peak flooding time. And then thirdly is cultural heritage. Green space allows for social connection in spaces that is mentally suited and provides sensory experiences, positive sensory experiences, so that people can also be physically active. So we see that everyone benefits from green space, especially children, youth, and elders. So in terms of Mombasa's urban context, we know that our urban formation is defined by the island. And we can see this over here. And the islandness that we have has resulted in spatial constraints, predominantly the fact that we're a very dense space, and that there's land scarcity and vertical growth. And we can see this. We have bungalows turn into apartments, and apartments are now coming closer and closer together. So a piece of land that was hosting maybe 6, 7, 8 people now hosts 100 residents through vertical growth. So the islandness of Mombasa has also made it an attractive port city. So much so that the city has experienced over three periods of violent colonial control by the Omani, Portuguese, and the British, a triple colonizations of sorts. So we understand that Mombasa is a layered city. And I think to start with at the beginning, we must look at the Swahili urban origins. The coastal region of Kenya is largely credited with a long and established history of urbanization. The earliest records of Mombasa as a city and an urban space date from 110 AD, indicating that urban tradition is native to the Kenyan coast. Mwana Mkisi established the first urban settlement in Mombasa called Kongowea. And Kisi is a Mijikenda woman who followed traditional Mijikenda beliefs that are the foundation of the Swahili tradition. And as we know, the Mijikenda people are a part of the larger Swahili Bantu collective and obviously the original inhabitants of Mombasa. Nkisi is credited for using Swahili architecture to design the city while keeping in mind the hot weather and the preservation of the environment. Mijikenda communities were regulated by traditional knowledge and practices that have contributed to conserving biodiversity and placing a lot of thought in environmental considerations. I think a very good example of that is the inclusion of green spaces as recorded historically and communal spaces that include greenery in part of community formation. But also, we know that Mombasa is a place where green and blue space converge. And what do I mean by this? I think we know that it's a city where the land greets the ocean. And in this sense, you have an ecosystem on the outskirts of the city, which is the mangroves. And it is well noted in literature that the Mijikenda people used and acknowledged the use of mangroves as a key ecosystem in their city's protection, but also in the ecosystem balancing. So after Mwana Mkisi, the next urban founder was Shehen Vita in 1000 AD. He is an Omani Muslim man who is credited with the bringing of Islamic architecture and urban planning to the space that is Mombasa. Vita founded the urban settlement of Mvita, original name, I know, and is thought to have fused the existing urban settlements of Kongowea, which we can see over here, and Mvita, to create a larger and combined Mijikenda Islamic urban planning landscape, both of which are cognizant of green space and are centered around the creation of community spaces that have open garden-like areas. Here, we see that there's a focus on creating space that is community-centric through nature. Of course, it is at this time that we also see the settlement of Toka seen in the south of the island, and it's the smaller circle here. And this, in this space, it's recorded that Mijikenda communities protected a baobab forest using a limestone wall, further indicating that green space was valued, protected, and sought after in the urban form. So we know that communities were actively protecting green space. So of course, this period was also the time where we had Omani colonialism, but after the Omani colonial settlement, we had the Portuguese. So I'd like to recognize that the Portuguese period of colonialism was sort of the establishment of the violent urban. Arriving in 1500s, the Portuguese burnt and ransacked Mombasa city thrice. This was an opportunity for the Portuguese to rebuild the city in a white European urban formation, be that in architecture, urban planning, and I think most importantly, social organization. Of course, burning the city down is very beneficial for the Portuguese because they could build in control into these new buildings. The most notable is the construction of a fort in Old Town, and this served as a Portuguese military base. It is, I think, widely recognized that this type of infrastructure and architecture put into Mombasa is that investment into a defensive architecture. The fort was used to control the city rather than care for it. So here we, and I think at this point, one of the biggest changes and the biggest changes in green space was that green space was a white-only space, and it was reserved for white Portuguese colonists. So now we see that in Mombasa, there's an active exclusion of Black and brown people from the natural environment, right? And when I look at this as a social organization, you see a few things that are very important. The first is that there is value in green space, value so much so that Portuguese have racially segregated this area, and that Black and brown people in Mombasa were unable to access this valuable space, okay? So here we see that there's a violent group of people who've come through violence, captured through violence, and then built things like the fort to reinforce their violence. So, of course, after this period of Portuguese colonialism, there was a brief period where the Omani colonialists were able to regain control of Mombasa. And it was then that Mombasa, by the Omanis, was leased to the British in 1887 and became an official British colony in 1895. So I would say, in true British fashion, the technique of divide and conquer was used to gain control of the city. And essentially, the crown focused on looking at Mombasa as a very extractive space. And that's how they set up the urban economy, but also the urban planning of Mombasa. The colonial administration maintained its very limited view of the country's urban centers, not as permanent settlements, despite the fact that Mombasa had existed way before, but as bulking centers for the shipment of raw materials to the empire. So if we look at the map, there's a very faint line that goes around Mombasa, and this demonstrates where ships, submarines, and defense networks were set up by the British, often seen as the only material urban investment done in this period. If we move on, you also see this table. And we see that the British furthered Portuguese policy and implemented a racial division of land, resulting in the densification of Black and brown neighborhoods, subsequently causing the reduction of green space. You had the outer ring of Mombasa, where the general white population lived, and this was very sparsely populated, meaning that green space could exist and green space was accessible. In an opposite way, Black and brown people who lived in Mombasa were firstly segregated from each other and then were forced into very, very small parcels of land. This essentially increased the density of the areas Black and brown people lived and then forced green space to disappear. Because when you have large groups of people, you have to house them, you have to care for them. And often the first thing to go is green space because of these very urgent and valid needs. Again, in this period, I think it's important to note that green space was a white-only space. So in the post-independence period, we've seen Kenya has fought for independence and gained it, but not a lot has changed in the urban planning structures. And it is well noted that a lot of the urban planning policies are inherited from this colonial rule and essentially ignore, or rather do not focus greatly on the inclusion and equity of green space through populations. So we know that in Mombasa currently, efforts around creating, maintaining green space are currently credited to the private and non-governmental sector. And from the map, we can see that less than 3% of Mombasa is currently publicly accessible green space, of which 3 of these areas are football fields. So what can we see from this? I think a great way to understand it is how is the past existing in the present? From the maps, we can see that the current areas of green space that exist now coincide with the Mijikenda protected urban areas. We see that the Mijikenda tradition and protection is alive through the space. And while they've changed and been adapted and clearly been lineated to very, very small areas, they still exist because of the ways Mijikenda communities have preserved the environment. A practice which has been sufficiently watered down through the colonial policy. I think, as discussed, we know the green space is environmentally important. But I think more so the lack of green space has robbed our communities of connection to land and nature and the ability for people to have a spiritual connection to others, themselves, and their beliefs. Without access to green space and nature, I think we are more removed from our communities as a whole. So to conclude, we have 3 things to really think about. The first is that less than 3% of less than 3% of Mombasa Island is publicly accessible green space, which is concerning. 2, that the island has a layered green space, but particularly that it's shaped by racial segregation. And that 3, there is a resilience in the Mijikenda urban design that has protected green space to this day. And I think from this, we can understand that we have a duty of care, and that we have a duty of care to think about nature and as the citizens of Mombasa, their inherent right to nature. Over to you, Asmira. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simran, for that. In designing this consultation, I thought it was important. We said that we wanted to be solutions oriented and want to talk about city sustainability and urban sustainability from a solutions oriented point of view. But I thought, well, how can we do that in such a broad way when cities themselves have such a complex and rich history, not only colonial, but also in the way that people have interacted with local governments. We can see in other cities, the dynamic is very different. And so I think that this has helped inform the strategy or the approach that we're taking as Unep Faith for Earth, in saying that a blanket approach, especially when we're talking about cities and urban resilience, it doesn't work. There are all these things that need to be taken into consideration if we are to make realistic solutions or propose realistic solutions and recommendations. But also in ensuring that faith actors approach the issue and these problems in a way that's cognizant of these various historical realities. And so, cognizant of time, and I do note Kusumita's question in the chat, I will respond to that. But I would like to move on to the next speaker that we have on board, and that is Mary Gona. And she is representing Barak Abdallah, who is the founder and the program director of the Brain Youth Group, and is also the founder and president of the Forest Restoration Agency. And on the International Day for the Conservation of the Mangrove Ecosystem, we're very pleased for Mary Gona and the Brain Youth Group to be part of this conversation, especially because we have faith-based organizations in Mombasa, grassroots organizations who have not been engaged in this space for a very long time. And so we have the Brain Youth Group here to shed light on what community-led restoration looks like, why we must foster these robust relationships for generation restoration, and what coming into this space looks like. And with that, Mary Gona, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, you
Hi,
are.
everyone. Okay, thank you. I'm Mary Gona. Actually, I'm representing Mr. Mubarak Abdallah. He's the founder and president for Brain Youth Group, and he's also the president for Forest Restoration Agency. Just an overview of Brain Youth Group. It's a community-based organization that was formed back in the year 2011. And mainly we do mangrove restoration, though we have other projects that involve beach cleanups. We normally do some beach cleanups. We have fish farming, that is mariculture, and we also have beekeeping, which is apiculture. We also do some community awareness and sensitization programs. Yeah, that is just an overview of what we normally do as a community-based organization. Yeah, then our vision is to restore the mangroves along the Chuda Creek, because as we were being introduced to this conversation, or maybe this topic, there is one of the speaker who mentioned that, who showed us on the map about the area along Chuda Creek, the area along Mombasa, that it had been degraded, which is very true. Talking of Chuda Creek, initially we had 1641 hectares, of which the El Nino rains that fell in the year 1997 caused a lot of destruction. So after the destruction, only 215 hectares were left behind. That means 1426 hectares were destroyed. So we have been working with the community. We have been combining efforts even with some of the religious groups, the faith religious groups, in helping restore the degraded area. So far, we have been able to mobilize the community members, and we have planted several numbers of mangroves. So far, we have planted 1.8 million trees, which has really helped. Okay, maybe to talk about what's motivated us to engage the community is that we realize that for the success of a project, for any project to succeed, you need to involve the community members, because they are the key stakeholders. They are the custodians of the project. So we have been engaging the local community in our project First, we go for the community mobilization and sensitization programs, which we have gone even to schools, reaching out to the students in schools, so educating them on the importance of mangrove, educating them on the importance of environmental conservation. So the children grow up with that kind of a knowledge that it's important to conserve the environment. It's important to maintain this ecosystem. So the kids grow up with that kind of a knowledge. And still back to the community, since we still do the community sensitization, this enables them get to know the importance of the conservation, and that's help us in the conservation efforts. So we have been working with the community members such that we normally involve them in our projects. Just to talk of today was World Mangrove Day. Today was the International Mangrove Day. So today we had to mark the day by planting mangroves, of which we didn't do it just as a group, but we had to involve the community members, because these community members will be our watchdogs back in the community, because you cannot just do you cannot just work out a project just by yourself. You have to involve those living adjacent to the area that you are planting. So that's what we did today, and we were able to plant several mangroves with the help of the community. Maybe just to mention the causes of degradation that have taken place, what led to the degradation along Chuda Creek or along the area that we are working with. The main issue, okay, going back to what I said earlier, that we had the El Nino rains that fell back in the year 1997. So they caused a lot of destruction. But in addition to that, we had the community members who took advantage of the situation. Since poverty levels have been at a maximum, there has been a high rate of poverty along Chuda Creek or along Mombasa. The poverty levels have been high. So that has been the major or the main issue that has been contributing to the destruction of mangrove, because these people have no other option of attaining their livelihoods. They have no other way to sustain them. So they end up destroying the mangrove, maybe to get timber, to get fuel wood for their use, to get timber to sell, at least to sustain their needs. So that has been the main, though we've also had along Chuda Creek we have been having an issue which to this point we have not yet solved it, but we are hoping that in the coming days it will be solved. We have been having this issue of brewing of the local brew. In Mombasa we call it changa. There has been brewing of the brew inside the mangrove forest, and this hasn't been something good to the ecosystem, because in the preparation of the brew there's normally pouring of hot water. They use hot water to make the brew. Yeah, they use hot water. So in the process, they end up pouring it down, which now affects the mangroves that have been planted. So you find out that in the area where water is normally poured, there can't be any survival of mangroves. The mangroves along that area are normally dead, but in other areas they do so well. But now in the area where there is pouring of the hot water, in the area where there is brewing, the survival rate is very, very minimal. Another issue that has been affecting our mangroves along Chuda Creek, waste management. There has been poor waste management along the coast, along Chuda Creek. Actually, we've been having cases where someone comes all the way from the upland areas. I mean areas away from the coastline. So someone comes along all the way with a sack full of waste, coming to dispose them along the ocean. And for us, when we are on ground, we take note of such people, and we normally meet them and tell them this is not the way to go. They have to look for an alternative to deal with their waste, because now dumping in the ocean, that pollutes the ecosystem, that produces another type of environment that makes the survival of the mangrove ecosystem or the mangrove life very difficult. Yeah, so yeah, those are the challenges that we've been facing, or the issues that have led to the destruction of the mangrove. Yeah. Then yeah, as I said, that we normally work with the community members, and yes, they have benefited from the project. No wonder even calling them to come and help us, they don't see it as a big deal. They normally come. So for us, our project, we love involving the community, because as I said, that for a project to succeed, you have to work with those around the area. So for us, we do that. For us, we normally, or we mostly depend on donor funds. For us, we don't have a main source of income. So our main source of income are donor funds. So for an instance that we get donor funds, that's an opportunity for us, because now we normally say that we cannot just utilize the donor funds by ourselves, then do the projects and later the project failing, since we don't have people to look after it. So we take that as an opportunity. We take that as an opportunity for us as community members or as Brain Youth Group. Getting donor funds gives us an opportunity to involve the community, come into a project. Because now you see in Mombasa, or even anywhere, you can't just call someone to work, then leave them go empty-handed. You see, this person has left whatever he or she was doing, then coming to attend to your activity, and now going empty-handed, it's really an issue for them. So for us, once we get the donor funds, we make sure that we get people come do the planting, then we give them like an appreciation token. So from that, this person goes back home like appreciating. There's something that I can get from mangroves. I can get something that can sustain me. I can get something that can help my family. Because for our group, we have our group is composed of women, youth, young people. So now, talking of the women, we also have single mothers. So you find that this is the only breadwinner for the family. So now, giving this person an appreciation token, this person goes back home, and from whatever she got, this will enable her keep her family running. This will enable her sustain her family. And also now, to the children or the members of the family, they will grow up knowing that mangroves are important. If they can help us meet our needs, they can help us sustain us, they can help us in one way or another. So in that way, we involve the community, and in that way, the community also benefits from the project. Another way that the community benefits, we have environmental benefits, which are not only to us, but not only even to the community, but to the entire world. Because right now, climate change has been a global issue. So for what we know is that one mangrove tree sequesters or absorbs 10 times more carbon than other terrestrial trees. So you can imagine planting one mangrove, you are equivalent to someone who has planted 10 terrestrial trees. So for us, planting trees gives us that ecosystem environmental value such that we get a clean environment. We help not only Kenya, not only Mombasa, but the entire world in terms of climate change. So that is basically how the community benefits in terms of financially and also in terms of environmentally. Yeah, plus we get the shoreline is protected from the waves, the tsunamis, the strong waves that come to the shoreline. The mangroves act like a barrier or a break for them to come into the land. So that means that the coastal people are protected, or the communities that live around Chuda Creek are protected from such harmful waves. Yeah. Yeah, that is basically how the community benefits from the project. Yeah. And maybe just to mention, I would love maybe the participants or everyone in this forum, I would love to call upon all of us to take up this initiative of restoring our ecosystem, especially in the mangroves, because now we are talking of Mombasa, and basically Mombasa doesn't have a terrestrial forest. Let me talk of a terrestrial forest. We don't have a specific area that we can say this is a terrestrial forest for Mombasa, but mainly now for Mombasa, we work with the marine forest, which is the mangrove, and that's the largest percentage of it. I would love to call upon us to take up the initiative to support us, and yeah, that will do us good. So thank you for being part of this forum. I appreciate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. And thank you for highlighting the excellent work that the Brain Youth Group has been leading in Mombasa. And it's uplifting to see that the youth are engaged in so many exciting partnerships, not only with local county government, but also with other civil society organizations, NGOs, to the extent where international organizations are funding your program, so that you have been able to expand from mangrove restoration into apiary. When I was preparing for this consultation with Mubarak, he mentioned how it's very important. He was very pleased to see how these two activities have come together in having the beehives, and the bees deter people from dumping garbage into the creek and into the ocean, protecting the mangroves, because a main source of pollution and damage to the mangrove seedlings has been poor waste management. And as you mentioned, yes, changa and spilling of changa, which is the local illicit drink of Mombasa, has impacted that. And so with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to move on to our third and final speaker, and that is Dr. Chris Elisara, and who has been leading the engagement of faith actors in this crucial conversation. And I invite him to share what role they play and how they can leverage their assets, their houses of worship, faith-owned land, etc., in making steps towards urban sustainability and what this means in the global landscape of things. So Chris, over to you.
Hey, thanks. I appreciate being here. I appreciate the presentations that come beforehand, because it grounds us in a place. It grounds us in the lives of people, their histories, the societies that have been formed, and also the ecological system. So this conversation is grounded in those things that have been presented before. So I appreciate that. And I'm just going to talk about a few things that will get us to acting as faiths. But I think for us to act as faiths, we need to take a step back and ask the question, why? people of faith are always asking, I think, a deep question, which is a why question. Why do we act? Because when we ask the question why, then we can direct ourselves in ways that are consistent with our values and with our beliefs. And I would say that in this context of rapid global urbanization, we're talking about, going from, approximately, 50, 55% of the world's population living in cities now to in the next 20 to 30 years, 75% of our world's population living in cities. We, as people of faith, need to see that challenge and respond to that challenge from a deep sense of understanding. And that means, I believe, I would say, a reorientation of our faith to the city. And I'm working with many different organizations, faith organizations, to work on this. So I come from a Christian evangelical perspective, so I can speak to that. But I'm working with many other faith traditions on reorientating our faith and therefore our actions to the cities. So a couple of things. I think we need to do this reorientation because there's modernist narratives out about the city, about what the city is for, what we do in cities and that type of stuff. And I'm not going to dive into that, but there's a whole bunch of narratives that I think we need to engage with as faith and say, are these the narratives that motivate us, and kind of engage with those and then and move with those. But I think there's also within our own faith traditions, I think we may have, and I know this is true for, my Christian evangelical tradition, I think we have muddled and perhaps even really wrong narratives about the city. And for example, I think one narrative we have in our minds is that, the city is bad and original creation, nature is good, right? And we know that, ecological systems are good, but our cities, in our concept, as we take them from scripture and our traditions, bad. I don't think that is a right way to think about the city from our Christian tradition. We start in a garden from the Genesis narrative, but we actually end up, as we go through the story, we actually end up, as told in the Bible, in a city, but it's a specially designed type of city. It's a garden city, right? And in that narrative, in that story, that imagination that we have, when we reorient ourselves to the city becomes not bad, but it becomes something good because it's designed properly. It's a garden city. There's trees in it. There's a stream that flows through it. The city is a place of healing and fullness of community, of both natural communities and human communities and God in that community. And it's all in the context of a city. And if we have this concept that cities are bad and creation is good, then I don't think we're going to have the imagination as people of faith to work hard for the challenges that we're facing right now in this rapid global urbanization I mentioned at the beginning. So let's work on reorientating ourselves to our own faith traditions to understand the city in a way that can enable us to act with urgency in this next decade. So that's my first point. The second point, I think a part of this reorientation is that to be human is to be an emplaced creature, right? I think our scripture teaches us that to be human, we are emplaced. That means that we are dependent on the places where we live, both the natural environment, which we're talking about now, and the built environment. So to be human is to be put in places that are commensurate with what it means to be human. So this requires us to build the places and design the places commensurate with being places that humans can flourish. And what do places like that like? Well, they're places where we live in community as humans, but in a healthy relationship with other geophysical systems, the mangroves that we've just been talking about. That's it. And the ecological communities of the mangroves and the geophysical systems, so that we have a stable climate for livable temperature range, clean air, clean water, clean oceans, we need these systems for food and the food systems that we need, and we need to work on changing our food systems so that they're commensurate with humanity. And we also need, these ecological systems for the materials that we need to build the places we inhabit and sustainable economies that we need to live. But we also need to get, the built environment right. And the built environment right in hamlets, in villages, towns, and cities, where we live out our spiritual, social, cultural, and economic lives is really important. And what does that mean? That means that, people of faith need to relearn that place matters, that we have to take care of the totality of place, the ecological systems and the built environment. And we need to design the ways in such a way that, because place matters, we have to design ways that we bring the environment, natural systems together in that place, because that place has an indelible impact on what it means to be human. So one way we might want to frame about this is that we have a right, there's a human right to housing, right? But I think we also can say that we have a human right to just, sustainable, productive, equitable, and beautiful cities, to be human. Really important. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, just going to throw a couple of ideas. One is take seriously the 15-minute city. A 15-minute city is a way that you design places at a human scale, right? And what that means is that those cities are designed or places that are walkable. Humans are walking creatures, right? And so a 15-minute city is basically saying, let's design a place at a human scale so that we can walk within 15 minutes or take a mobility scooter or a wheelchair to all the things that we need, or most of the things that we need, within 15 minutes. With that design principle in mind, we can design these places that we need and fix the bad places. We've been talking about some places that probably need some fixing. Okay. Another thing to think about is the city we need now. This comes from UN Habitat and the World Urban Campaign, where we are having a conversation with the platform of UN Habitat, with the civil society, to ask the question, what is the city that we need? We had this conversation for Habitat 3 in 2016, right? And that was called The City We Need. But we've just had another conversation for the World Urban Forum, which just happened in Poland this year, to say, what do we need now? We're many years on since 2016 and Habitat 3. So what is it we need now? In that conversation convened by UN Habitat, faith folks got into the conversation to ask, what do we need? And there's 10 principles. So look it up, the city we need now. There's 10 principles, and there's 7 action items for each principle. And I encourage you to read that, but I also want to encourage you, and this comes to the thing that you mentioned to me, what's happening at the global level for people of faith in the city space. Join the World Urban Campaign. Your organization can join the World Urban Campaign and bring your what you're doing as a faith organization, as a faith community, into the conversation, because we could have used more voices, in that conversation that got the city we need now. And there is a faith principle of action in there, basically saying that, we need faith actors to work in this space to create the cities we need now, which is a great statement, but let's flesh it out by coming online into the World Urban Campaign and being in those dialogues. And I'll come to another place that we do dialogues in the World Urban Campaign in a little bit. And another place, I think, just to help you imagine, what does it mean to take place seriously with ecosystems and city design, so that we can live as fully as we possibly can be, directed by our faith, and our faith expanded to everybody for the common good. For those that are Christians or those that are evangelical, I'll just put this out because I worked on it. It's from my tradition, and it might give people an imagination. We did a statement called "The Gospel and the Future of Cities," a call to action for Habitat 3. That just kind of talks about how we view this conversation, this dialogue. So so take a look at that. It'll give you insights to us, and then we really encourage other faiths to do similar work within your faith and come up with statements that can be shared with the world in these places that we are having dialogue, looking at the challenges and trying to resolve them, because we have to always act as people of faith from the place that we understand deeply our own traditions, and then bring that into the dialogue and then work and collaborate with others. So that's the first point. The second thing I'm going to say very quickly is that, we've been doing this work of urban development or, city development for centuries as faiths. And so we have a long legacy of this. And I will always remember this great tour I took with Martin Palmer, who is a multi-faith leader that many of you may know. He took me on a tour of his home city of Bath. This was like 2 years ago. And he walked through 5 different iterations of the city's development through the religious communities that lived in Bath, from the original settlers there and their particular faith to the Christians, to the Romans, back. And so, we have, and the city is still now is impacted by that spatially. It's impacted also, I think, socially because of the ways that the social infrastructure was built over that time still impacts it. So there's lots of things that we do. So we have this heritage. However, I will say this, is that people of faith are going to be doing this city urban development work in a new context. So we need to think through how we do it now. We have this heritage and this history, but we really can't go back to that mode. We need to figure out how we're going to do it in collaboration with city government, urban plans, comprehensive plans, regional plans, and so on and so forth. How are we going to fit in with that? Other community actors and so on and so forth. So we're in a new phase of, as we come up, I think, to speed, responding to the challenges. We have to do this in a whole different new way. And that's kind of exciting. And then I just want to talk about things like how we do this as faiths. There's 2 basic kind of ways I think we do this as faith. One is we do this as faiths when we come together gathered, right? There's a gathered way that we do faith, and that requires us, or most of us, to have actual property. We have temples, mosques, churches, synagogues. We have land and buildings. If that's what we do faith gathered, we have these properties, all right? And then we do faith scattered, when we go out from those places and we're in society, and I'm going to talk about that secondly, but let me just talk about the faith gathered piece. We have a responsibility, because we have those properties and buildings, as already been said, to be responsible for those in this ecological climate context of crises of biodiversity, crisis of climate, and also social crises. Our buildings and our properties need to be thought through in ways that we can make those places of ecological refuge, of green spaces, as you've been mentioning, and parks, of habitat restoration, energy efficiency, use them, as much as we possibly can, so we're getting effectiveness and efficiency out of, the energy we put into them, and so on and so forth. So we have a responsibility for those particular properties and make them the best they could possibly be for social good. And the last thing I'll say in terms of faith scattered, when we leave those buildings, we're a part of society. And so we are advocates for the common good. in our towns, places, and neighborhoods with everybody else. And as we act for the common good based on our values and our faith actors, we can become advocates in the discourse about where a city is going for things that align with the common good and faith principles, right? And so we act for the common good both as faith gathered and faith scattered. And the last thing I'm just going to mention is that in this regard, for example, in California, we have a housing crisis. The Turner Center for Housing and Innovation at UC Berkeley estimates that within California, religious properties have about 65 square miles of property. We own about 65,000 square miles of property, religious organizations, all of us, right? All those religions, 55 square miles. That's about the size of a small city in California called Stockton, right? So if we just think about our property, we probably have solutions in those 65,000, acres of property we're responsible for housing. We can probably leverage that for green space and parks. We can probably also connect that to caring for those pieces of property ecologically. We can, and so on and so forth. So we actually have our hands on the levers of a lot of the solutions that we're talking about within our own power, as it were. So, we could help the housing crisis in California if we acted on our own properties in particular types of ways, with the imaginations that I just talked about of reorientating ourselves to our own faith traditions to see place as important and design as important. So I'm not going to go on any more than that, apart from say a couple of things. If you connect to the Word Urban Campaign, we have these Urban Thinkers campuses. And Urban Thinkers campuses is where faith communities, and we've done a couple of these, can gather together to organize ourselves and have dialogue. So join the Word Urban Campaign, initiate an Urban Thinkers campus, bring your faith community together, bring other faith communities together, and that's a very good vehicle for organizing ourselves and moving ourselves forward. And then when the UNAP with Faith to Earth, this whole program is fantastic and it's growing, and we'll have relationships with the other kind of things that we're doing at UN Habitat and other places and other nodes in this urban space. And the last thing I'll say is, KSIT is developing these great resources with UNEP that are going to come online with this urban resilience kind of focus. So there's a bunch of stuff that's happening, and I will just leave it at that for now.
Thank you very much, Chris. Very appreciative that you're awake very early where you are, and sharing with us this very insightful intervention of why faith actors need to be engaged in this space, and what they bring to it. And so if we look back at the consultation and the conversation that we've had here today, we've seen really that we need to be thinking about collaboration and making these steps forward so that we're not replicating, we're not causing any kind of inefficiency for our own very enriching engagement in this space, but we're leveraging on very exciting programs that are already going on, like the Brain Youth Group. And in doing so, that we take into consideration what the historical realities are of the particular city. And I would like to uplift one statement that Chris made. And he said that we have to take care of the totality of the place, which reminded me of a methali, which is a Swahili, it's the name of a Swahili proverb that I've been sharing with our coordination group with Andrew and Gopal. And this methali goes, kila ndege huruka na mbawa zake. Sorry, kila ndege huruka na mbawa zake. And this means that every bird flies with its own wing. And what I mean to say here is that the solution, or at least approaching the solution, isn't in one form. We hear from Chris that at UN Habitat and through his engagement and even the program that we're designing, that it comes up with principles, with ways that we can approach this very big issue of urban sustainability, but also ecosystem restoration in urban areas. But really, to put into practice the solutions, the particular things that we can do ranges from a degree of actions, from tree planting to renewable sources of energy in houses of worship. And of course, we turn to faith actors, as Chris mentioned, as having considerable amounts of assets in particular cities, but also across the world through its networks. And with that, I would like to share, as we conclude, this fantastic video that we created in collaboration with the Alomano board here in Nairobi.
If you recall, even in the olden days, the people used to go to the forest. For instance, the Kikuyus, they had their god in Mount Kenya. And whenever they went to offer sacrifices and so forth, they went to the forest, away from everybody. This was an opportunity for people to have the same thing nearer to where they stay. When you are in the prayer garden, the peace and quiet and the serenity of being in a green space, you feel you are in God's hands. You become one with nature and commune with God on one basis. And we decided to have a kind of a Marian devotion. Consolatas are very devoted to Our Lady. And we built up that prayer garden as a devotion to our mother. And when we go there and be close with our mother, we feel really fulfilled. And it's a feeling that I would want other people to experience. And also having that green space, it offers you the serenity. And most churches, I believe, they have a lot of land. And if they can just take a piece of the land, and it need not be as big as our prayer garden, but even in a small way, a small space, to commune with God, and it will be a lot more appreciated.
And of course, I would like to thank the Faith Forward team and the team at Consolata for their support in helping us come up with this excellent video. One of our interns, Ricardo Fornasari, for putting this excellent piece together. And of course, Ainaru, who is on communications. Ladies and gentlemen here with us today, the video hopes to demonstrate that we don't need to look very far. Consolata Shrine is in Nairobi. As Simran mentioned, there's only 3% of Mombasa's land that is a green space or an available green space to others. And so coming up with, or putting into practice some of the things that we need to do, as simple as a small prayer garden, or planting a tree, whether it's in an estate or in a compound, in the church compound or the house of worship compound, wherever it may be, is something that your own networks can help you fulfill and accomplish. This is the kind of peer-to-peer learning that we hope to prioritize as means of advancing actions for the Sustainable Development Goals, but particularly those related to climate and environment. And with that, I would like to thank all our speakers for making the time, for waking up very early, of course, the Center for Earth Ethics for hosting us here today, and to all the participants for the excellent questions in the chat, for sharing your experiences with us. And I do invite you to stay in touch with us, me in particular, if you do want to share experiences about what excellent practices are in your city and in your country. Good practices are being shared on the Yale platform, collecting specifically actions by faith actors for the SDGs. And with that, thank you very much. There is a handbook that is coming out that pulls together all the experiences and the learnings from this consultation. The next consultation is on species in September. Please don't forget, have a look at the UNEP webpage that we shared with you to find out more about the date and how to register for that consultation. Thank you very much, everybody.